All right. Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're looking at a guy who, well, he really needs no introduction, does he?
I think most people would recognize the name.
It's Elon Musk. You've seen the tweets and the memes and everything, but we're going to try to dig a little deeper than that. We're going to go beyond the headlines and see what we can learn about this guy.
Yeah, and we've got some great sources today, a lot of in-depth articles and interviews that I think will paint a very full picture.
Yeah, so even before we get to like the Teslas and the SpaceXs, his early life was really interesting. Like, did you know that he was coding by the age of 10?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty impressive, isn't it?
And then he sold his first video game at 12. I mean,
Definitely shows an entrepreneurial spirit early on, for sure.
so our mission today is to kind of go beyond all that hype,
Mm-hmm.
and see what drives the guy, what makes him tick, and why should any of this matter to us?
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in the kind of larger-than-life persona, but there's a lot more to the story.
Yeah, so let's start with those early years. He was born in South Africa, right?
That's right. Yeah, in Pretoria.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't always an easy childhood. He's talked about facing some bullying and feeling like an outsider, but I think those experiences really shaped his resilience.
Yeah, and then he makes this huge decision to leave South Africa, goes to North America as like a young adult. That takes guts, right?
For sure. I mean, it speaks to that ambition we see throughout his life, that willingness to take risks and chase big dreams. And, that risk-taking definitely plays out in his career as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about PayPal. I mean, it's such a household name now, but a lot of people don't realize it wasn't his first rodeo, right?
Hmm.
He had a couple of companies before that, Zip2 and X.com.
Oh, yeah, those were his early ventures. And, they laid the groundwork for PayPal in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it's that X.com story that I find so fascinating because he was actually ousted as CEO.
Yeah, that's a key point that often gets overlooked. He had this vision for X.com, this online financial services platform, but he clashed with the board and they ended up replacing him.
That's got to be a blow to the ego, right?
I'm sure it was, but, and this is crucial, he didn't just walk away. He stayed involved. He was still a major shareholder, and he helped guide the merger with Confinity, which
Yeah.
eventually became PayPal.
Okay, so he kind of rolled with the punches there. So then they sell to eBay for $1.5 billion. That's going to be the fuel for everything that comes next.
Absolutely. That provided the capital for him to really pursue those ambitious projects we know him for today. But more than the money, I think it's a valuable lesson in adapting to setbacks. He didn't get his way initially, but he recognized the potential of the new situation and made the most of it.
So does that bring us to SpaceX then? The whole colonizing Mars thing. How much did he risk on that early on?
Oh, a lot. I mean, SpaceX wasn't an overnight success story, far from it.
Yeah, I was reading about those early rocket launches, and they did not go well.
No, they didn't. The first three launches were complete failures. I mean, we're talking rockets exploding, millions of dollars lost.
So what kept him going? I mean, most people would call it quits after one, let alone three failures.
Yeah. Well, that's where his unwavering belief comes in, right? He had this vision, and he was determined to see it through. And it really came down to the wire. He poured his entire fortune from the PayPal sale into that fourth launch.
Wow. So it was literally all or nothing at that point.
Yeah, it was. And the tension must have been incredible. I mean, can you imagine the weight of that moment? Three failures, your entire fortune on the line. If that fourth launch had failed, that would have been it for SpaceX.
It's hard to even fathom the pressure.
Yeah.
So tell us about that fourth launch. What was at stake and what did its success mean for SpaceX?
Well, everything was riding on it. I mean, the company's survival, his dream of space exploration, all of it.
So what happened?
It succeeded.
It worked.
It worked. And that wasn't just a victory for SpaceX. It was a major turning point for private space exploration. Suddenly, it was clear that private companies could launch rockets into orbit. And more than that, it caught the attention of NASA, which led to a $1.6 billion contract.
Wow, talk about validation.
Absolutely. SpaceX was now a legitimate player in the space industry, and it all came down to that one crucial launch, the one he risked everything on.
So they proved it could be done.
Mm.
But it's not just about getting to space, is it? It's about how they get there. These reusable rockets like the Falcon 9, that's a game changer, right?
Absolutely. It dramatically reduces the cost of space travel, makes it more sustainable, and brings us closer to that vision of a multiplanetary future. And, when you think about it, the whole colonizing Mars idea, it seemed like science fiction just a few years ago.
Yeah, it was always this far-off concept, but now it feels like it could actually happen.
And that's because of the innovations that SpaceX is pioneering. All right, so before we move on to Tesla, I have to ask you, when you first heard about SpaceX, did you think he was crazy?
A little bit. I mean, it seems so audacious, so out there. But maybe that's what it takes to achieve something truly groundbreaking.
Yeah, that unwavering belief, that willingness to push boundaries, that's what sets him apart. Okay, so speaking of pushing boundaries, let's move on to Tesla.
So, Tesla. Right. It's crazy to think how different things were back then. Electric cars, they were like a niche thing.
Oh, yeah, definitely not mainstream.
Not at all. People thought of them as like slow, clunky,
hmm
not really practical.
Yeah, limited range, not a lot of charging stations. The technology just wasn't there yet.
But Musk, he saw the potential. Not just as like a way to get around, but as a solution.
Right, a key part of this whole sustainable energy future he envisions. And he was willing to bet big on it.
We talked about SpaceX almost going bankrupt, but Tesla had its own close call, right?
Oh, yeah, 2008, the financial crisis, they almost went under.
And he had to use his own money to save it. Didn't he basically empty his pocket?
Pretty much. After bailing out SpaceX, he poured almost everything he had left into Tesla. Huge gamble, especially with the economy, like, in free fall.
Talk about believing in your visions. How did they turn things around? What were those key innovations that made Tesla Tesla?
Well, a few things. First, the battery technology. They focused on developing batteries with longer range and faster charging. That was huge.
Yeah, because that was always the knock on electric cars, right? The range anxiety.
Exactly. So longer range, faster charging, that made them more practical. And then the software. They completely changed the game with their software.
Yeah, that touchscreen, the whole user experience, it's so intuitive.
Right. Traditional automakers, they were way behind on that. And then manufacturing. Tesla run efficiency, all that.
So they weren't just building cars, they were disrupting the whole industry. And didn't they, like, open up their patents, too, to encourage other companies to go electric?
They did. It seemed counterintuitive, but Musk realized that for electric vehicles to really take off, the whole industry needed to shift.
It's like he was thinking bigger than just his own company.
Exactly. It was about accelerating the transition to sustainable transportation. Okay, so we've got SpaceX, we've got Tesla, but that's not even the half of it.
This guy's got like a million companies. Solar City, the Boring Company, Neuralink, it's wild.
It's like he's playing real-life SimCity or something, but with much higher stakes. And each of these ventures, they're all about tackling these big, complex problems.
So Solar City, that was all about solar panels, right?
Yeah, but it wasn't just about installing panels. It was about creating this whole vertically integrated energy company, producing, installing, managing solar energy systems.
All part of that sustainable energy vision.
Yeah.
And then there's the Boring Company. Tunnels under cities to avoid traffic. I mean, come on.
It sounds crazy, right? But traffic is a huge problem, and Musk, he's not afraid to think outside the box.
But, like, is it actually feasible?
Well, it's still early days, but they've completed some test tunnels, and the technology seems promising. Whether it can really revolutionize transportation, that remains to be seen. But the fact that he's even trying, that says something.
Okay, and then we get to Neuralink. Brain-computer interfaces. That's straight out of science fiction.
It is, but Musk is trying to make it a reality. Imagine being able to control devices with your thoughts, restoring functionality for people with paralysis, treating neurological disorders.
It's incredible, but also a little, I don't know, scary. Like merging our minds with machines.
Yeah, there are definitely ethical concerns, and Musk, he gets that. He's talked about the risks of AI a lot. That's why he co-founded OpenAI, to make sure AI is developed safely and ethically.
So even while he's pushing these boundaries, he's also thinking about the potential downsides. It's interesting. This guy's revolutionizing space travel, changing the auto industry, digging tunnels, and now he's trying to connect our brains to computers. How does he even do it all?
Right. It's mind-boggling. I mean, I read that he regularly works 80, 100 hours a week. Is that even sustainable?
That's insane. All right, well, we'll dive into the man himself and the controversies that surround him when we come back for part 3. Okay, so we're back, and we've talked about a lot, SpaceX, Tesla, even brain chips. But now I kind of want to focus on Elon himself for a bit.
Yeah, it's important to remember there's a person behind all these companies and headlines.
And he's a pretty complicated guy, right?
Definitely. Not your average CEO.
I mean, we've talked about his successes, but there's been a lot of controversy too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. His management style, some of his public statements, they rub people the wrong way sometimes.
So how do we reconcile those two sides? The brilliant innovator and the kind of controversial figure.
Well, it's a balance, isn't it? He's got this incredible drive, this ambition that's led to some amazing things, but it can also, well, it can be a bit much sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, 80, 100-hour work weeks. That's got to take a toll.
And there have been reports of, difficult work environments at his companies, a lot of pressure to meet those ambitious goals.
And then there's the whole Twitter thing.
Yeah, his social media presence is, well, it's definitely unique.
He's not afraid to say what he thinks, even if it gets him in trouble.
That's for sure. He's very outspoken, sometimes impulsively so.
It's like he takes risks, not just in business, but in how he presents himself, too.
And that polarizes people. Some admire that boldness, others find it reckless.
It's interesting, though, that willingness to challenge conventions, it's kind of a thread throughout his life, isn't it?
Definitely. From leaving South Africa to starting these crazy, ambitious companies, he's always pushing boundaries.
So as we wrap up, what do you think? What's Elon Musk's legacy going to be? Is he just this, tech CEO, or is it something more?
It's hard to say. It's still unfolding, right? But I think his impact goes beyond any one company or technology.
How so?
I think he's inspired a whole generation to think differently about what's possible, to dream big, to not be afraid to fail.
That's a good point. He's kind of become this symbol of, pushing the limits of innovation.
Exactly. And whether you agree with his methods or not, you can't deny that he's changed the world in some pretty significant ways.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners, then?
I think it's a reminder that we live in a time of incredible potential. Where technology is advancing so rapidly, and it's up to us to decide how to use it, how to shape the future.
Yeah, and maybe to not be afraid to ask those big questions, to challenge assumptions like Musk does, even if it ruffles some feathers along the way.
Exactly. All right, well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you learned a thing or two about Elon Musk, and maybe, just maybe, it sparks some ideas of your own.
Absolutely. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a review.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.